Rose, what right does a black woman have to set rules for me? What standing do you have to lecture me? He hissed through gritted teeth, then pushed her against the cold hallway wall. It wasn't a crazed criminal. It was Officer Derek Collins, a badge-wearing man who behaved like scum. No one intervened, no one spoke up, but the camera was still running, and the person he was choking was none other than Jade Thompson, the former police chief of this very precinct, who would make him pet. Disgraced and ruined, his career turned to dust. What state are you in? If you encountered someone like Officer Derek, what would you do? In the afternoon at Ridgeview Police Department, the light from the large glass windows had begun to dim against the gray tile floor. The sounds of keyboards and distant footsteps continued steadily, but an invisible pressure seemed to settle over the entire building. Jade Thompson, the station's police chief, walked through the administrative area holding a file stamped with bold red letters. Emergency Report, Internal Affairs Unit. She headed toward the hallway marked Tactical Division Access Only, a zone that used to fall directly under her supervision but had recently come under the quiet control of a group of mid-level officers. A shadow appeared from the opposite end. Derek Collins, the officer in charge of the area, stepped out from the duty room and swept his gaze over Jade with a mix of surprise and disdain. "What are you doing here?" he asked coldly, his tone full of command. Without waiting for an answer, Derek strode toward her and blocked her path. Jade stopped, eyes steady, replying calmly, "I have the right to inspect this area under regulations. If there's an issue, you can address it with respect." Derek didn't respond right away. His eyes narrowed. Then suddenly he grabbed her by the throat, violently and with seething malice. "Regulations? A black woman like you thinks you can lecture me about the law?" he hissed, forcing her back against the cold hallway wall. The sound of a chair dragging echoed faintly in the distance. A few scattered staff turned to look, hesitating. Some stood frozen, staring, their eyes filled with conflict, yet none moved. One person backed away completely, closing the office door as if trying to avoid involvement. Jade could feel Derek's cold hand pressed against her skin, but she didn't struggle or scream. She stared him in the eye. In her gaze was a threatening silence, like all emotion had been buried deep, leaving only a smoldering flame. Derek growled, "You violated a restricted zone. I have the right to detain you." He yanked her toward the main desk, indifferent to the witnesses around him. The sharp, metallic scrape of handcuffs echoed through the silent hallway, causing a woman from records to jolt upright, only to sit back down when Derek's eyes flicked toward her. The entire station fell into stunned stillness. Jade said nothing during the arrest, but every step she took was firm, her head held high despite her uniform being tugged out of place. Physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation of being publicly degraded in the very place where she once held supreme command. For a brief moment, she caught her reflection in the frosted glass of an office door, her face slick with sweat but unwavering. Derek announced to the onlookers, "She's being arrested for violating a security zone. If anyone has a problem, file a report." His voice was flat, as if it were routine. Jade didn't resist, but deep in her eyes, something began to take shape, something colder and more resolute than anger, a silent vow. The atmosphere thickened, as though every sound had been squeezed out under the weight of unspoken tension. In that moment, no one realized this incident would ignite a confrontation between justice and a rotting power structure. The duty station grew unusually quiet once Derek escorted Jade away. A heavy silence clung to every stare, as if everyone was waiting for someone else to speak first, but no one dared. The sound of typing continued somewhere in the back, and a phone rang briefly, then went quiet. Everything slowed down, allowing the irrationality of what had just happened to drift past like a phantom no one wanted to name. Jade walked slowly toward the holding room, her shoulders pinned down by Derek's brute force. Her wrists had been cuffed, the pressure leaving marks beneath her strong brown skin. She didn't cry out or defend herself. Instead, she drew in a deep breath, steadying her rhythm to maintain control. The pain didn't matter as much as the bitterness of betrayal. She was being treated like an intruder within the very institution she had spent her career building and protecting. Every silent step marked a deeper humiliation, She refused to let be buried like so many cases before. Derek stayed beside her, his words pouring out like poison, trying to assert dominance. Some people think they can climb to the top, but when they fall, they finally see who laid the stones beneath their feet, he spat, loud enough for those behind to hear. Every sentence was a cut to her pride. But Jade remained silent. That unnerved him most. He didn't fear her eyes, but he couldn't endure the calm not born of fear or rage, but of a readiness to strike back when the time was right. In the tech room nearby, Ethan Chen, the surveillance officer, stared at the screen. The moment Derek assaulted and cuffed Jade was captured by a ceiling camera. Ethan sat frozen, hand resting on the mouse. A sharp pang in his chest told him he could no longer pretend this was normal. He had stayed silent through many unexplainable things, but this time, the line had been crossed. Close by, Maya Brooks was organizing files when she happened to glance up as Jade passed. Their eyes met. In that instant, Maya saw something chilling in Jade's expression. A light not burning wildly, but lingering, like flames under fading ash. She didn't move closer or say a word, but that brief exchange planted a seed of resolve within her. One she never anticipated. Jade was shoved into the holding room. The steel door slammed behind her with a sharp metallic thud. She stood upright, eyes fixed on the narrow slit of light from the ceiling vent. In the dimness, her face was tense, every muscle holding firm with the poise of someone who had never given in. Something in the air began to shift, like a silent current preparing to erupt. From that moment it was clear this was no longer about two people. A question hung in the sealed ceiling. Why did Derek do this? And why did no one speak up? In the hearts of those who witnessed it, doubt had been sown, and it was beginning to take root. The real battle hadn't started, but the system had already cracked. The next morning, the Internal Records Office received a document titled Temporary Detention Report. Internal Personnel Jade Thompson. The printed file bore an official letterhead, file ID, creator's signature, and a timestamp that matched administrative protocols down to the minute. Everything appeared complete and impeccably procedural, until Danielle sat down to examine each section. As an internal affairs coordinator, Danielle's job was to review all misconduct records and submit weekly reports to the federal system. She was familiar with how reports from this precinct were written, efficient, administrative, and carefully crafted to avoid mentioning anything that might cause trouble for decision-makers. But this file wasn't just brief. It lacked life. The reason for detention line contained only 4 words: unauthorized area entry. There was no description of conduct, no reference to any dispute, and no list of witnesses. The signature box for visual surveillance confirmation was blank. Strangest of all, it was filed by Lieutenant Barrett, widely known as the best report writer in the precinct, meaning someone who knew exactly how to follow the format while keeping anyone in power safely untouched. Danielle leaned back in her chair, holding the paper up to the light. She had worked here for 6 years and had seen her share of deceptive paperwork and system errors used to cover questionable actions. But this was the first time the person being targeted was the chief of police herself. She vividly remembered standing behind the records counter, her hands trembling as she saw Derek move in on Jade and handcuff her under the gaze of silent bystanders. She hadn't stepped forward, not out of agreement, but because she knew what happened to those who spoke up at the wrong time. But now, that thin sheet of paper felt like it was pulling her upright from the inside. The line between safe and complicit suddenly didn't feel as distant as she had thought. By midday, Danielle approached Maya Brooks' desk under the pretense of borrowing last week's report. While scanning through the data, she casually asked, "Was there a malfunction with Hallway C's camera? I searched the timestamp from yesterday's incident, but the system isn't showing any footage." Maya paused briefly, glanced at Danielle, and then closed her laptop. "Not sure. I wasn't granted access yesterday," she replied evenly. Danielle said nothing more, but their eyes met just long enough to confirm they both sensed something was wrong. Neither of them was ready to say it aloud. That afternoon, with fewer people in the office, Danielle reopened the file on the system, checked the original print command code, and quietly issued a copy order. The document was printed from a secondary machine, bypassing the internal network. She slipped the copy into a plain envelope, sealed it, and tucked it deep into her personal records drawer, a drawer protected by a private code no one else had ever used. Her hand trembled slightly as she pushed the drawer shut, not out of fear, but from knowing that this moment marked her crossing a new threshold. The records room lights remained on, but somehow the brightness no longer seemed enough to expose all that was hidden. It was a system designed to run smoothly without leaving traces, yet even the most seamless machines could leak, from cracks that once seemed invisible. And this time, that crack bore the name Danielle. The temporary holding cell was located at the end of the south corridor, where sunlight rarely reached and footsteps echoed like compressed vibrations. Jade sat with her back against the wall, arms folded, eyes fixed on the closed steel door. No one checked on her, no lawyer appeared, no notification came from higher-ups, and there was no sign of any federal representatives being informed. Time passed irrationally, as though someone was deliberately delaying what needed to be brought to light. Jade knew this silence was no accident. It was a form of manipulation she had grown used to, executed smoothly, legally, and easily overlooked. Ethan Chen sat in the surveillance room, the monitors displaying footage from key zones. The archived footage from the previous day revealed a strange blank space in hallway C. The recording of Jade being restrained by Derek was shortened by 17 seconds. On the administrator dashboard, a midnight login appeared. Ethan captured the data, saved it to an external drive, but did not send it. He stared at the folder, fingers hovering over the send key, then paused. The truth was here, but who was ready to preserve it in its full, unaltered form? Later that day, Danielle was summoned to the Personnel Oversight Office. Lieutenant Henderson, known to be close to Derek, spoke with a tone halfway between jest and warning, saying that digging deep into already cleared files was not something a young employee still finding her footing should be doing. His tone was mild, but it made Danielle's knuckles tighten. On her way back, she caught a glance from a colleague who had once been friendly. This time, it passed over her like she was a stranger. Danielle began to understand. This system did more than remain silent. It watched, remembered, and waited for the right time to strike. That evening, she sat alone in the archives. Old files appeared before her in yellowed sheets. She paused at the report of a case from 2 years ago. A trainee officer detained under insubordination, even though surveillance clearly showed no resistance. Danielle remembered that the only one who spoke up was a low-level staffer who was swiftly reassigned and erased from the system within a week. She had done nothing to stop it. She had even signed the final summary that closed the case prematurely. The helplessness from back then returned, but this time it came with something else: shame. She glanced at the shelf, storing current files. For a brief moment, an image of Jade resurfaced in her memory. The woman who once quietly protected a female staff member from punishment for refusing an unfair night shift, who never grandstanded, but always appeared at the right time. Some of Jade's actions went unnoticed, but Danielle knew them, and now she was the only one left close enough to see what was being concealed. At the end of the day, Danielle walked to the temporary office of Caleb Morgan, the federal investigator newly assigned to internal oversight. She knocked, took a deep breath, and quietly said, "I want a private conversation. No notes, no recordings." Caleb nodded, asking no questions. The system hadn't collapsed yet, but it had just shuddered out of sync, and from that shift, a single link had begun to realign. An internal message was dispatched from the HR office early in the morning, even before the morning patrol shift began. The subject line was as dry as ever: notice of temporary suspension pending internal investigation. The content stated the reason directly: security protocol violation, unauthorized presence in a restricted area. There was no mention of the hallway altercation, nor was there a name of Officer Derek Collins. Everything was presented in a technical, standardized tone, just as the system always did when it needed to distort the truth in a formally acceptable way. In the main office area, a few people looked up as the notice appeared on the system screen. Some furrowed their brows, others whispered quietly, a few exchanged glances and then returned to their work. No one asked any questions aloud. Those close to Derek even nodded, taking this as the clearest sign yet that something had to be done. At the records reception desk, two young staff whispered, "Maybe she really crossed a line." Suspicion spread faster than any email, as if people had been waiting for an official excuse to justify their inner unease. At the detention cell at the end of the hallway, Jade received the notice from a clerk. He placed the folder on the table and walked away without a word. Jade quietly picked up the document, her eyes scanning each line quickly. Her expression didn't change, but something in her gaze shifted, a cold, resolute gleam like a blade slicing through fog. She folded the paper and set it aside. No reaction, no unnecessary movement. To her, the suspension wasn't an end, but a signal that something deeper had just begun. A battle for control over the truth. In the server room, Kevin, a young IT technician, was monitoring the access history of the security camera system. He didn't have the authority to alter core data, but he could review periodic backups. A newly overwritten file time-stamped around midnight made him pause. The timing aligned perfectly with the incident in Hallway C. Metadata indicated that the file had been edited using a Level 3 administrator account. The list of those with that clearance was short. Lieutenant Barrett was among the few names. Kevin leaned in close to the screen, reviewing the entire access chain. The overwrite hadn't deleted the original footage entirely. It had simply layered a spliced segment over the top. To an untrained eye, the video would appear smooth and uninterrupted. But Kevin had seen this overwrite pattern before, during a security training session that Jade herself had once proposed. A familiar feeling returned, as if everything was repeating itself, only this time it was real and serious. He opened the external backup drive and searched for the last version that hadn't been fully overridden. After several attempts, the system confirmed that part of the deleted data could still be recovered. Kevin created a private, encrypted copy and secured it with a password only he could remember. As he watched the progress bar on the screen, he knew he was stepping into a dark part of the system, where data, though still truthful, could become a weapon in the wrong hands. Leaning back in his chair, Kevin exhaled deeply. He didn't know when or how he would use the footage or for how long it would remain viable. But he was sure of one thing. It was one of the last fragments of unaltered truth. And he knew that in a place where power could erase the line between right and wrong, preserving an original copy was an act of courage. Alone in the tech room, lit only by the glow of the screen, Kevin recalled the moment a few weeks ago when the system suddenly restricted his access rights. His account had been blocked from certain surveillance zones, with no explanation, and no mention in any subsequent meetings. At the time, he'd thought it was a software bug or a reassignment protocol. But now, after everything he'd seen, the connection was clear. That incident wasn't random. Someone had prepared in advance and needed him out of the loop once sensitive data came under threat. Late in the afternoon, Kevin stopped by Danielle's desk, holding a stack of system maintenance files, though his eyes were fixed on her. He spoke softly, just enough to avoid being overheard. "Do you think the suspension notice this morning was justified?" Danielle paused, her gaze resting on the keyboard before shifting to Kevin. "Maybe they had their reasons," she said, her voice calm. The answer was evasive, but the way she avoided his eyes said otherwise. Kevin lowered his voice. "I checked the metadata. The video was edited. The choking scene isn't intact." Danielle remained silent, but her fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the desk. Both of them knew that if any of this came out at the wrong time, not only would the data disappear, they would vanish from the system too, as if they never existed. That night, Kevin returned to the tech room and launched the advanced monitoring software. He quietly downloaded the full metadata chain of the relevant video and switched to binary analysis mode. The timestamp structure was distorted, a clear sign that the footage had been cut and reassembled. Near the exact moment of the altercation, A strange code segment appeared outside the standard data format, a hidden script commonly used in high-level video editing. Kevin froze, holding the cursor still. What appeared on the screen was no longer speculation. This was deliberate data tampering. He accessed the system's auxiliary storage, a place low-level tech staff used to save raw, unprocessed files. Scanning the timelines, Kevin found a portion of the original data that hadn't been completely overwritten. Some frames were lost, but enough remained to reconstruct the scene using patchwork methods. On the screen, the silhouette of someone being choked flickered, dim lighting, a distant scream fading through shattered audio waves. Just a few more steps, and Kevin could restore the footage with high accuracy. He sat still, overwhelmed by a rush of thoughts. Having worked less than 2 years, Kevin was still a contract employee, without stable benefits, without promotion prospects. Any misstep could push him out of the safety zone. But he remembered when he was nearly reassigned for not fitting the organizational culture, and it was Jade who had directly opposed that decision. Even though she had no reason to take his side. Her action that day had saved his job, and more importantly, convinced him that some people still chose what was right, even when it made them the minority. Before leaving the tech room, Kevin printed the entire metadata copy, created a compressed file containing the raw recovery footage, encrypted it using a personal tool, and stored it on a small private hard drive. He didn't take it home, but sent it to someone he knew was waiting for a signal from the technical side. Someone who didn't talk much, but had never ignored a credible lead. Then, Kevin opened a secure mail client and typed an anonymous report to the Federal Internal Affairs Office. He left no name, no return address, just a subject line: Surveillance Data Tampering Evidence, Ridgeview Precinct, Level 3 Source Code. When he hit send, Kevin didn't feel heroic, nor did he think he had done something extraordinary. He only knew that in a system where voices are controlled and data distorted, sometimes the beginning of truth comes from someone whose name no one remembers on the organizational chart. And maybe, as Jade once said, justice doesn't require anyone to be a hero. It just needs someone to begin not turning away. Under the dim light of the basement archive room, Danielle flipped through thick files, her breath slowing each time she came across the familiar name, Derek Collins. Following Caleb's suggestion, she had been granted access to old records from the Internal Affairs Unit, documents previously hidden behind layers of clearance. The officer, now facing serious accusations, had in fact been a disturbingly frequent figure in internal reports for nearly a decade. Every appearance of his name was marked with the phrase, "handled internally," followed by the same templated conclusion, "insufficient grounds for administrative violation." The language was rigid, lacking detail, and always bore the signature of the same deputy head of the disciplinary board, a man who later retired without anyone ever mentioning his name again. Skimming through the timeline, Danielle came across a case from 5 years ago, flagged with the line, "classified by upper-level order." Something about it felt eerily familiar. As she read the first line of the summary, a memory snapped back. At that time, she had just been transferred to Internal Affairs as a rookie investigator. The case involved an allegation of abuse during interrogation. The victim was a young social worker at a juvenile center. Her name was Lena Cruz. She had reported being coerced by Derek Collins, threatened and physically harassed after refusing to sign a pre-drafted statement. Danielle, still full of belief in the system's integrity, had taken the case with the resolve to uncover the truth. Before the investigation progressed, she was summoned by Captain Ross. In a cold room piled with untouched paperwork, he looked at her over his glasses and said, in a tone colder than the air conditioning, "If you want to last here, you need to learn where to look." Danielle understood perfectly. That same day, she withdrew from the case, citing work stress. From that point on, the Lena Cruz case vanished from collective memory as if it had never existed. Now, reading the file again, Danielle's eyes stopped at the victim's full name, Lena Danielle Cruz. Her heart tightened. Lena had been her close friend from college, the one she lived with for the first 2 years after graduation. They had lost contact after the incident. Danielle used to think Lena avoided her out of personal hurt. Only now did she realize it ran deeper. It was silent disappointment. She printed out the file and for the first time read Lena's full statement. Lena's words held no bitterness, just precise, cold details of what happened in the small interrogation room that night. The final lines of the report made Danielle's throat close up. "I know no one will believe me, but I'm still testifying because I once believed in someone in the system." Danielle lowered the pages onto the desk. For the first time in years, she no longer saw the truth as just another bureaucratic puzzle. It was a living reminder of what she had once turned her back on. And now, even if late, it was time to face it. That afternoon, beneath a pale gray sky, she stopped in front of a modest women's support center, tucked inside a quiet neighborhood on the city's west side. The old signboard was worn, but light still glowed inside. She hesitated at the glass door, gripping the reprinted testimony. Tracing Lena's civil record had led her here. Without notice or appointment, Danielle came, like someone trying to reclaim something they had once lost. Lena initially refused to meet. A polite receptionist explained she doesn't see unannounced visitors at this hour. Danielle left a note with a few lines. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I hope you'll let me listen." She turned to leave when the inner door opened. Lena stood there, her gaze neither surprised nor angry, just absent of trust. Upon seeing the copy of her old testimony in Danielle's hands, she gave a slight nod and invited her in. Their conversation took place in a small room with pale blue walls and simple plastic chairs. Lena spoke first. "I'm not mad at you for being scared. I'm mad you stayed silent. There was no replay of the past, no tears shed for old wounds." That sentence pierced through the defensive layers Danielle had built over the years. She looked at her friend and quietly recounted everything that happened after she walked away from the case. The veiled threat from Ross, the dragging doubts, and the guilt she had never dared express. Lena didn't interrupt. When Danielle finished, she pulled a thin file from the drawer. Inside was the original complaint she had filed, along with a USB. "This is the interrogation recording. It never entered the system because I mailed it and never heard back." Danielle opened the device right there. The audio played Derek's voice, clear and arrogant, laced with commands and threats. Compared to the official report, the recording was undeniable proof of deliberate alterations. Danielle asked to make a copy and promised to give it to Caleb. Lena agreed but asked to remain anonymous. "I don't want to be in the papers. I just want what should have happened to finally happen." They didn't hug, but when Danielle stepped out the door, she knew the bond between them, though fractured, was still held in one unbroken strand. That night, Danielle sent the audio and all supporting files to Caleb. He skimmed them quickly and said, "This is the first piece they can't control." His expression betrayed tension. "Get ready. From now on, someone's going to want us to stop." Danielle didn't ask further, but the warning etched deeper into her mind than any directive she had ever received. Back at the office, she didn't turn on the lights. The glow from her screen was enough as she reopened Derek's files, scrolling through the years. This time she wasn't glancing through them as a duty-bound officer. She read every word like someone who had once stayed silent and had no intention of ever doing so again. Kevin sat in the corner of the small office, the desk lamp casting a sharp beam onto the screen as the final command line completed. The old hard drive Maya had handed over had been overwritten multiple times and the data was heavily fragmented. Still, he hoped something could be salvaged. In a hidden corner of the recovery folder, a video clip emerged. The screen lit up. The footage was clear, captured from a ceiling angle inside the interrogation room, showing a man in police uniform lunging forward, both hands gripping the neck of a handcuffed woman. Her face was tilted, lips moving but making no sound. The man in the video was Derek Collins. Kevin enlarged each frame. The angle was fixed, lighting intact, with no sign of editing. But the audio file was completely blank. Metadata confirmed the audio had been deliberately overwritten, not corrupted by accident. When Maya and Caleb arrived, Kevin laid everything out. Both stared at the screen in silence for over a minute. Maya slowly whispered, "This is when he choked her." Caleb frowned, eyes locked on the frame. Even without sound, the video was a rare piece of visual evidence backing Jade's account. But what troubled Caleb was the lack of context. Danielle, stepping into the room, froze. That was the day she had been instructed to withdraw from the Lena Cruz case, the day she chose to look away. They convened in a closed-door meeting. Ethan asserted that the clip could shake the entire case, at least in public perception. Caleb disagreed. In court, they'll ask, what did she say, what did he say, why is there no audio? Maya countered, we can't wait for every missing piece. People need to see the truth, even if it's incomplete. The argument intensified. Caleb warned, if the clip is challenged, Derek and his team will twist it into a fake. They'll paint Jade as a manipulator with an agenda. Nothing will save her then. Danielle stepped forward, her voice steady. I've stayed silent. I've stepped back. But releasing this now, without context, is like putting the bomb back in the hands of the one who pulled the pin. The room went quiet. Kevin confirmed he could recover full metadata, proving the clip was filmed in Interrogation Room 3, matching the duty log timeline. However, restoring any leftover voice data could take weeks. Maya took the USB containing the clip and said nothing, but her eyes had changed. A decision had been made. Caleb made a move to stop her, then sighed. He knew that for Maya, part of the truth was better than none. Outside the window, rain began to fall. Inside the room, the silent footage looped as if screaming into a world grown used to silence. Maya told no one. She quietly sent the clip to a journalist she had once worked with on past investigations. No name, no return address, just a short message. Let it speak. Hours later, the video surfaced on social media, spreading like a wildfire. It bore a provocative title, Video Proof, but no one hears a thing. Public reactions split immediately. One side viewed the clip as a knockout blow to Derek Collins, exposing clear physical assault in an interrogation room, something never officially acknowledged. They called for suspension and prosecution without delay. The other side, especially pro-government media, responded as if on cue. They questioned the clip's authenticity, accused it of being taken out of context, and dismissed it as emotional manipulation aimed at public sympathy. Derek's legal team launched a swift counterattack. At a press conference, they declared, our client was trying to stop a self-harm incident in the interrogation room. The camera shows what happened, but without audio, and audio is the key evidence. By focusing on the missing sound, they demanded the court release the original, full recording, fully aware that audio no longer existed. Under mounting public and legal pressure, Ethan proposed an independent technical report. If there's no sound, let the images speak, he said. Caleb quickly agreed, assigning a team to analyze nonverbal behavior. Meanwhile, Danielle reached out to an international organization experienced in analyzing footage of political violence. One call was all it took. They agreed to help, offering to examine expressions, gestures, and force impact within the video. Social media became a battleground. Some of Jade's former colleagues began speaking up. They recalled things they had once heard, acts of aggression, threats they'd brushed off, thinking, no proof means best to forget. Yet others clung to the argument that guilt must be proven. Emotions are not evidence. The court remained silent. The clip hadn't been admitted as official evidence, but pressure was building. That evening, a news broadcast aired the video again. No voiceover, no narration. The anchor ended with, sometimes truth needs no dialogue. The question is, who has the courage to hear it with their eyes? In the dim room, Maya sat alone before the screen. The bluish glow from the video reflected on her face, caught between hope and dread. Her hand rested on the still warm USB, her eyes calm but unreadable. She knew that once the truth had been let out through a barely open door, no one could control what it would drag behind, or whom it would come for, but she also knew that some truths, even stripped of sound, could still scream through images, and some actions, even if never recognized, could begin to change everything. A black SUV pulled up in front of the main entrance. It bore no official insignia, just a temporary tag from the office of the Federal Inspector General. A man in a dark suit, badge clipped to his belt, entered with calm composure and an uninviting stare. His name was Marcus Lane, an FBI investigator dispatched under emergency orders. Lieutenant Colonel Weller seemed caught off guard, but could not refuse the official authorization Marcus handed over. His voice was firm and direct. "I'm here to audit every complaint file from the past 10 years. If there's anything to hide, I suggest you take it down now." Marcus's presence was not just unexpected. It disrupted the entire atmosphere of the precinct. Many glanced over their shoulders as he walked past, their eyes both cautious and curious. Maya was the one who had leaked the clip to the media, and Ethan and Caleb were still dealing with the aftermath. But when Marcus said he needed honest cooperation, it was Danielle who stood up first. She requested a private meeting. Sitting across from him in a small conference room with an old dark wooden table, Danielle recounted Lena's complaint years ago, the pressure from higher-ups, and the files labeled "handled internally." Her voice was steady, and her gaze no longer avoided his. Marcus listened without interruption, occasionally jotting down notes. When she finished, he nodded. "I need you on the coordination team." That afternoon, he called Maya, Ethan, and Caleb together. He skipped introductions and got straight to the point. "I don't want to hear what was cleared. I want to hear what was buried." Caleb explained the data retrieval process. Maya added context about the clip, and Ethan provided a list of complaints previously closed without a clear reason. Marcus requested full access to the internal storage system, focusing on files showing signs of editing, missing attachments, or reused denial templates. A priority list was drawn up, and complaints linked to Derek Collins were marked in red. Marcus designated Danielle as the internal point of contact because she knew who stayed silent and why. It wasn't praise, it was a conditional trust. As night fell, Marcus remained in his temporary office. In the dim yellow light, he opened the first file, an interrogation violation from 2018. The victim had written, "choked, but no sound on camera." The officer listed Derek Collins. He noted one line in his investigation log by hand before closing the file. "When a system fears its past, it means the present was never cleansed." The hallway outside was quiet, but in that room, an excavation had begun. Under the faint hallway lights in the basement level, Danielle led Marcus to the archive room where most pre-digital files were stored. Old metal cabinets, handwritten code sheets, and faded paper copies lined every shelf. She showed him the location of the original server that once stored internal security footage, now tucked into a dusty corner and nearly forgotten. Some folders had erased tags, others had overlapping ink as if pages had been replaced or pasted over. Danielle silently scanned the familiar paperwork, reading it for the first time with the eyes of someone who had once looked away. Marcus began cross-referencing, looking for patterns across complaints that shared motifs: threats during interrogation, excessive force, witness statement manipulation. There were at least 12 structurally similar cases, with different victims, times, and places. The common thread was the same final signatory, Captain Ross. None of the cases had resulted in formal discipline, and no one was ever prosecuted. The officer most frequently involved was Derek Collins. He asked Danielle to take him to the main interrogation room, where the clip had been recorded. The space hadn't changed much, with its stainless steel table and ceiling camera still in place. Marcus measured dimensions, checked the camera's angle, and verified the device's serial number. The results matched the metadata from the clip Kevin had recovered. Notably, the official camera records listed the device as malfunctioning, no footage recorded that day. In other words, the system had recorded the opposite of the truth. Just as he returned from the scene, Marcus received an urgent notice from the district office demanding that the audit be paused due to incomplete legal protocols. He didn't react immediately. Instead, he called the office of the Federal Inspector General. The call lasted 10 minutes. When he returned, his face was unreadable. "From this moment on, this team has full access to all data, including locked sections." Danielle's silence lingered for several seconds before she nodded, as if recognizing the undercurrent had finally begun to stir. That night, Marcus randomly selected 5 files among over 100 marked unfounded. He asked Maya and Danielle to prepare summaries for each. One of them was a 2016 case in which a woman reported threats after filing a complaint of coercion by police, In the handwritten supplement, the victim noted, "I can't continue the complaint because my family was threatened." This sentence had never appeared in any official report. Marcus pinned a large board to the wall and started mapping the connections between key players, Derek Collins, Captain Ross, the victims, and the erased files. Arrows slowly formed a network, no longer isolated incidents, but a deliberate operational pattern. He addressed the team in a calm voice, "We're not investigating a person. We're tracing how a system has survived by hiding the truth." No one replied. They all stared at the board and realized what they had once seen as a coincidence was actually a mechanism. As Danielle turned off the lights and stepped out of the room, she looked back at the board one last time. For the first time in her life, the ink and paper that once buried the truth were beginning to take shape, and this time she did not look away. Caleb received a copy of an internal letter anonymously sent to the secure inbox. Although there was no official sender, the content made him spring to his feet. The bold line at the top read, "Request to delete case A235 data as approved by senior management." Below was the signature of Captain Samuel Ross, stamped for verification. What caught Caleb's attention wasn't the signature, but the case number, A235, the same case Ethan Collins had mentioned during a closed meeting weeks earlier, the one he was forced to abandon when the audio evidence mysteriously disappeared. Danielle was tasked with cross-checking the system's records. She accessed the internal archive and opened the original entry. The senior approval section had been edited, with the most recent update time-stamped 2 months ago, an anomaly since the file should have been closed the previous year. The editing software listed a user ID with access privileges limited to captains. Danielle paused for a few seconds, then sent Ethan a single message. "The signatory is Ross." A call came through immediately. Ethan stayed silent for a long while, then said, "I know. Back then, I said someone was shielding them, but no one wanted the case reopened." He recounted the case from the previous year, when he accused a group of officers of violent conduct during a midnight check. Ethan had a recording of one officer making aggressive threats, but it vanished just days before the hearing. The case was closed abruptly due to lack of verifiable data, and Ethan was suspended for 30 days. Caleb expanded the search by tracing equipment funding codes from the precinct's budget requests and came across a chain of payments tied to the State Public Security Fund, an entity coordinated by Senator Harold F. Langston. This man had publicly defended Derek at a security conference 2 years ago and, according to the press, had asserted that law enforcement must be granted full authority in emergency scenarios. What made the team even more cautious was that Ross had been photographed standing next to Langston at the Urban Security and Law Enforcement Freedom Summit, an association the media had largely ignored. Maya received a message from an anonymous investigative journalist revealing that Ross had once been nominated as a regional advisor for Langston's Senate campaign. This timeline eerily coincided with the period when Ethan was suspended and the complaint file was erased. Maya confirmed the information, then forwarded it to Caleb and Danielle. The pieces began to fall into place. Danielle spoke softly. "We thought Ross was just a conservative who resisted change, but he's the gatekeeper." Caleb nodded. "He didn't protect Derek out of loyalty. He did it because if Derek fell, the entire power chain would collapse." Outside the window, sunlight cut through the thick curtains, casting a long streak on the meeting room wall. Danielle looked at that light and, more clearly than ever, saw what had long been hidden behind the name of internal stability. Danielle sat silently in front of the screen, the dim blue glow reflecting off her cheek. She had just completed access to the secure system logs, invisible only with high-level clearance. In the sequence of commands, she found a login entry from the night Ethan's complaint file was closed. The access level was marked Admin A, a classification granted to only a handful within the department. She cross-checked the IP address and discovered it matched the computer registered to Captain Samuel Ross's private office. Everything seemed engineered to leave no trace. But someone had left a log line buried deep in the system. Caleb requested that the entire metadata package be forwarded to Kevin, the technician who once recovered the chokehold footage, for further analysis. Kevin examined the original audio file and identified clear splicing. The segment containing the officer's threats, which Ethan had reported, had been overwritten with an extended silence, using the exact method known as partial overwrite. This could not have been a random system glitch. It was a deliberate act. Caleb carefully requested a full timeline-based backup of all modifications to prepare for submission to the Federal Inspector General. Danielle didn't stop there. She reopened her personal journal where she had documented irregular directives over the years. One date halted her, the exact day the audio disappeared. Ross had called her away from the audio verification room. His words rang sharply in her memory. "This doesn't concern you, go have lunch." At the time, it had seemed like a simple directive. Now, she understood its real meaning. She had been pulled from the hotspot at the critical moment. Maya observed Ross from a distance during an internal meeting. He maintained his calm facade, eyes steady as he answered questions regarding the documents. But something had shifted. Recently, Ross had been holding frequent private meetings with two of Langston's closest advisors, the same individuals seen with him during lobbying campaigns for police protection policies. Maya documented the encounters without drawing conclusions, but she felt it deep down. Ross was preparing a calculated exit. Ethan, who had started the case that was twisted and buried, decided to speak up. He submitted a supplemental report to the Federal Oversight Committee, detailing the full sequence of events and his request to testify publicly should Ross be summoned. In the conclusion, he wrote, "They can delete the files, but they can't delete my memory. I will recount every detail even if the system once chose to forget." 3 days later, Ross received a formal summons. The attached note stated, "The case is no longer under internal jurisdiction." On Ross's desk lay a draft of his early retirement letter, still unsigned. Beside it was an old photo. 3 men standing side by side, grinning with pride. Ross, Derek Collins, and Langston. Danielle looked at the image, reprinted from a media archive, and a chilling question rose in her mind. How many other pieces of evidence were erased before anyone dared to speak his name? She didn't need the full answer. She only needed to know she had touched the first layer of dust, and someone would have to blow it wide open for the world to see. Under the dim yellow light spilling from the slightly ajar door of the third-floor conference room, Danielle froze. The building had fallen nearly silent, save for the faint murmurs echoing from inside. She hadn't planned on returning, but that voice, dry, restrained, and aggressive, was hauntingly familiar. Her breath caught when she heard Lena's name mentioned, paired with the phrase, "Take care of it permanently." She didn't have any professional equipment with her, only her phone. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the recording app and quietly placed the device near the door. Inside, the conversation between Derek and Captain Ross was escalating. There were no filters or coded language. Ross issued the order without hesitation. "Don't let anyone bring the past to light." His tone was cold, clinical, as if reading a crisis response manual rather than deciding someone's fate. Derek sounded hesitant, his voice lower but not enough to mask the unease. "They're digging into the old files. Caleb, Maya, and even Marcus are involved now." Each name struck like a final blow to the illusion of integrity within their ranks. Danielle couldn't breathe for a moment as Ross cut him off. "If necessary, cut the wire. You know what that means. No witness, no case." Her entire body froze. Since when has the truth become a debt that must be silenced at all costs? That line wasn't a warning. It was an order, a familiar one. The same kind that had driven Lena out of the force, the same kind that had haunted Danielle's every step. She forced herself to remain calm. Any movement now would leave traces. Danielle backed away to the end of the corridor, where the light didn't reach, and waited until the door opened. The 2 men walked out. Derek weighed down, Ross calm as if they had just wrapped up a financial briefing. Once they were out of sight, Danielle returned to the room. It hadn't been cleaned yet, and the whiteboard was still marked with scribbles. She raised her phone and took photos. Scrawled keywords were visible. Records room, Caleb, data transfer this week. She didn't need explanations. It was clear they were moving soon. Back at her desk, Danielle plugged in a USB, backed up the recording and photos, then wrote a short note to Marcus. This system won't break unless we catch it speaking its own lies. No one heard a sound. No one knew what she had done. But for the first time in years, Danielle didn't feel like someone watching from the sidelines. She had stepped in, not as a witness, but as someone confronting those who believed they couldn't be heard. Marcus sat silently in the makeshift meeting room, headphones plugged into his laptop. The recording didn't reveal faces, but each word sliced through the air like a blade. No witness, no case. He didn't need notes, nor a second listen. When it ended, he looked up at Danielle sitting across from him, her eyes steady, no longer hesitant, like when they first began working together. He spoke slowly. This won't stand in court, but it's enough to move forward. Without further debate, an emergency meeting was called. Maya suggested a strategy: release part of the recording, mask the voices, leave out the names, and let public pressure do the rest. The crowd will ask questions, the press will dig deeper, Ross won't stay still, she explained. Ethan opposed the idea, fearing it would endanger Danielle most of all. Marcus paused briefly, then agreed on a middle ground. Send the full audio to the federal inspector's office. At the same time, create a separate case file. Mark the source as undisclosed to protect the witness. Soon after, Ross called a sudden internal meeting. He ordered a review of all internal network access logs and flagged any unknown devices that had connected to the surveillance system in the past month. Meanwhile, Derek was caught in the basement archives, flipping through old paper files and attempting to access locked folders sealed during Marcus's audit. Though she maintained her composure, Danielle began to sense something was off. She noticed a stranger repeatedly appearing near her parking spot each evening. They never approached, but always showed up at the same time. That night, she sent a message to Caleb. If I lose contact, check the Aurora folder. I left the original file there. The message was encrypted and sent through a secure channel. Then she powered off her phone. Marcus proposed temporarily removing Danielle from her support role for safety, but she firmly refused. I can't get into the system. But this time, I have accessed something deeper. My own resolve. The room fell silent for a few seconds. No one said anything more. At the end of the day, during a closed meeting attended by Maya, Ethan, Caleb, and a representative from the federal office, Marcus stood and pointed at the board connecting multiple cases. We're no longer investigating an incident. We're proving that this very room is where people learn how to bury the truth. Outside, the temperature dropped. Wind swept through the long hallway leading to the back gate. A black SUV with no license plate sat quietly by a flower bed. The person inside didn't smoke, didn't listen to music. They were waiting, not to leave, but to strike at the right moment, or at the right vulnerability. And the system had never been known to forgive those who dared turn back in search of the truth. Under the dim yellow light shining from the car ceiling, Danielle sat silently in the driver's seat. Gripping her phone as if holding onto a fragment of memory she wished had never resurfaced. After working with the investigative team and revisiting data related to Lena's case, something else began to rise within her, something clear, heavy, and long unacknowledged. She opened a personal folder on her device, and after a few seconds, an audio file labeled "Temporary hold, do not share" appeared. It was a piece of sound she had kept to herself, an unnamed relic of the past. The wind slipping through the window gaps couldn't muffle the voices in the recording. The thud of impact, a young man's panicked scream, then Derek's voice, sharp and cold. Danielle closed her eyes, the scene from 6 years ago returning vividly. She had been a trainee assigned to shadow an investigation of a petty theft. Derek was part of the unit, a seasoned officer known for handling disruptions swiftly and cleanly. In a hallway without cameras, she had seen him shove a young black man against the wall, press his face into the bricks, grip his neck, and issue threats. The man didn't fight back or shout, he only trembled. Yet the report later claimed he had been aggressive and had threatened an officer, justifying his administrative detention. Danielle had once believed the truth should come to light. She tried to include the full details in her report, but before she could save the file, a superior summoned her to the conference room. A high-ranking officer placed a hand on her shoulder and said, with a smile, "Don't overdo it. You're new. Write what fits, what's safe. Her original description was erased, replaced with a lifeless stock phrase, identical to hundreds of others. Incident handled in accordance with procedure, no misconduct found. She understood exactly what had happened, but chose to stay silent. Derek knew it too, and when they crossed paths the next day, he wore a satisfied smirk. "If you want to go far, learn which way the wind blows," he said. No, Danielle was no longer a naive trainee, but the guilt never left her. Sitting in the dark car, she documented the entire incident in a secure file, attached the audio recording, and sent it to Caleb with a note. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I want you to know this happened, and I didn't do the right thing." For the first time, she didn't avoid her own reflection in the rearview mirror. Her eyes no longer held fear, only acknowledgement and a quiet resolve. Caleb read the message that same night. He didn't send a long reply, didn't reproach her or reopen old wounds. Just one sentence. "Silence once killed someone. Today, it might save others." It didn't erase what Danielle had failed to stop, but it was enough to convince her that her confession wasn't meaningless. The next morning, she printed the recording, placed a copy in an envelope, and then tore it up before mailing. She kept the original, locked it in a personal drawer. For Danielle, it was no longer evidence for a courtroom, but proof to her conscience. She wouldn't use it to accuse the past, but to remind herself never to step back again. And next time, when choosing between silence or speaking up, she would not choose safety. Bathed in the pale blue glow of two facing monitors, Kevin sat quietly in the small room now used as a temporary data center. Lines of code streamed steadily across his analysis screen. The deeper he went, the more anomalies surfaced. A batch of temporary logs had been deleted precisely on the day Derek was honored in a public ceremony. The alterations appeared just before the system's scheduled backup, as if someone had intervened with deliberate intent. Kevin documented each timestamp and sent a preliminary report to Caleb. "It'll take a few days to fully recover," he messaged, "but this data didn't vanish on its own. Someone made it disappear, and they knew exactly what they were hiding." The next day, before Kevin even sat at his desk, his phone buzzed. On the other end, someone from the city's IT administration delivered a brief but clear message. He was ordered to suspend all unauthorized data recovery. An internal email followed, citing contractual clauses and warning that unauthorized data retrieval may lead to administrative action. There were no questions, no technical explanations, just a warning wrapped in a bureaucrat. Ethan was the first to react after reading the update. "They're watching to see how far Kevin will back down," he said, voice low and tense. Maya was quieter but stared straight at Kevin. "Do you still want to continue?" The answer came after a pause. "I know the line, but if everyone stops at fake boundaries, this system will never show its true fate." That night, Kevin quietly set up a parallel backup system outside the internal network. Every decrypted file was saved directly to an external hard drive with no device ID and no log history. Simultaneously, he sent an encrypted package to a former contact who once worked with whistleblower protection. "Don't open it unless I go silent for 3 days," he wrote. "And if that happens, deliver it to the Federal Oversight Unit." He didn't believe he would be silenced, but he wouldn't allow himself the luxury of naivety. In the weekend team meeting, Kevin spoke a little. He calmly reported progress, letting Caleb summarize the core findings. Everyone seemed to sense a growing weight on his shoulders, but no one asked aloud. Before leaving the room, Kevin glanced toward Danielle as she tucked away her files. "I'm not here to be a hero," he said, slowly and clearly, not needing a response. "I stayed because I once saw someone choke while everyone stayed silent, not this time." The door closed behind him. No applause, no nods of approval, but in the eyes of those left behind, something had awakened. Not a burst of courage, but a quiet resolve, one that kept spreading through every log, every trace of data, every person who once believed they were nobody in a system that thrived on fear. The recovered data had only been restored for less than 2 days. When Caleb attempted to back up the original video file, but the system abruptly reported an error. File not found. He checked the central storage directory, then the backup drive, but everything was empty. Kevin immediately accessed the system logs. The results confirmed the video had been uploaded at the correct time and properly encrypted, but now it had vanished without a trace. More disturbingly, the log recorded an access from a special-level admin account, a type of clearance that no member of the investigative team possessed. Maya turned toward the tech room, her gaze as sharp as a blade. Has anyone accessed the system in the past 2 days? The data security staff shook their heads. No irregular activity had been reported. Ethan suggested using his personal backup copy, but Caleb quickly dismissed the idea. If the original was deleted, any copy could be dismissed as fabricated. We need data chain integrity. The air tightened like a stretched wire. Danielle folded her arms, staring at the screen, her voice steady. There's a mole. Not an outside hacker, someone with internal clearance. Maya exhaled sharply and spoke slowly. To erase it this cleanly, someone gave the green light. Silence spread among the team, each member beginning to ask themselves, who's watching us? Kevin, usually composed, showed signs of unease for the first time. He scanned all system logs from the past 3 weeks and discovered a hidden program disguised as a security update. This software enabled remote access and self-deleted once its task was complete. In a low voice, Kevin noted in the technical log, "I've seen this before." In the Oregon State Prosecutor's data breach, Caleb understood immediately. This was no longer a glitch, but a coordinated act of sabotage. At a safe house, Jade opened the door when a gray envelope silently slid under it. Inside was nothing but a thin sheet of paper with a neatly handwritten line. Silence is safety. No return address, no fingerprints, and the ink was untraceable. She sat still for a moment, staring out the window. Pale sunlight lay across the old wooden desk, casting shadows over a recently rejected report. Using a pencil, she inspected nearby equipment, shut off communication devices, and then stood up. She burned the paper over the gas stove, the flame catching quickly and leaving nothing but ash. As the cinders settled, Jade stared into the bathroom mirror, gave herself a subtle nod, and whispered, "Now they're afraid." It wasn't pride, but a chilling certainty. If they needed to threaten her, it meant the truth was already too close for comfort. Caleb didn't wait. He drafted an urgent email to the Department of Justice, attaching all system logs, access credentials, and the detected malware code. In the subject line, he wrote, "Request for independent federal investigation, coordinated evidence tampering." The final line in bold read, "If we are stopped, there will be dozens more ready to stand up." And he knew, this time, silencing them wouldn't come easily. A short headline appeared on the front page of an independent outlet. Original choking video existed and disappeared overnight. The article quoted an anonymous source within the tech community who confirmed unusual logins into the central security system. Social media ignited instantly. Hundreds of comments demanded answers. Who has the authority to erase evidence under investigation? And are we living in the age of technology or the age of hiding behind it? The hashtag "deleting evidence is a crime" trended in under 12 hours. Amid the uproar, Jade closed the window, disconnected from the internet, and turned on an old voice recorder. She sat facing a wall, never looking at the camera, recounting everything, every detail, every emotional thread from that fateful day. From the way Derek entered with vacant eyes, to the grip on her neck, to the grip on her head. "I don't know if anyone is listening or believes me, but I have to say this," she said at the end of the recording, "because if I stay silent, the system will believe it was right." The file was saved to a personal hard drive, along with a handwritten note to a federal attorney. "If I disappear, make everything public." Soon after, Maya appeared on a live news broadcast. She didn't reveal any sources, but spoke with clarity. "We are witnessing an attempt to bury the truth using high-level tech and low-level ethics. And what's most terrifying is, it almost worked." While viewers saw a determined journalist, behind the scenes, Maya received an anonymous message. "It's too late to back out." Even more unexpectedly, Danielle received an email from someone she barely remembered, a retired officer who once worked under Ross. He attached a photo of a page from an old internal logbook, with a line that read, "Verbal order given to delete all copies to prevent instability before the budget review." That sentence sparked fury from suspicion. Caleb used it as a lead to trace the IP address from the night the video vanished. It matched a secondary server located within a high-security government zone none of the investigators were cleared to access. Unable to ignore it, the Department of Justice announced a federal internal hearing with a direct focus: deliberate evidence deletion. Notably, Jade was invited as a whistleblower, a formal acknowledgement that her testimony had reached the highest levels. However, in her response, she did not confirm whether she would attend. She remained silent. In Caleb's office, the lights stayed on through the night. On the desk were two images: a final screenshot of the video before deletion, and a quote from the letter Jade once received. "Silence is safety." He wrote on the whiteboard beside his desk, "If they're losing sleep over us, we're on the right path." That line served as a reminder: truth doesn't win by explosion, but by depriving lies of peace. And those who refuse to step back are turning every piece of evidence into forward momentum. The internal disciplinary records archive in the FBI basement was void of people, lit only by the weary white glow of fluorescent lights reflecting off dusty rows of steel cabinets. Marcus Morgan paused at a thin file labeled "Processed Insufficient Basis," then opened it patiently, page by page. Beneath the faded paper, one name appeared 3 times in heavily redacted memos: Thomas Reed, a former officer from the North District Surveillance Unit. He had served 15 years without incident until he abruptly resigned after an internal investigation that was never made public. The reason for his departure was summarized in 2 words: voluntary resignation. Marcus leaned in, frowning. In the appendix of a November report, he found a faded handwritten note describing rational suppression and non-procedural assault by an officer named Collins. In the upper left corner of the page, a red slash crossed out the author's name, a familiar sign for files marked for removal. But Marcus knew the lines that were struck out were often the ones worth reading most. Thomas's last known address led to a remote suburb nearly 3 hours from the city. Marcus departed before dawn, carrying a printed copy of the file and a handheld recorder, fully aware that someone like Thomas wouldn't speak unless he was ready. When the car turned onto a dirt road leading to an old wooden house nestled among short pines, Marcus saw a man chopping wood in the yard. The man wore no hat, his graying hair and sunburned skin making it hard to guess his age. That was Thomas. Thomas looked at the stranger with a calm but cold stare. Marcus stepped out of the car and introduced himself briefly. There was no handshake, no invitation inside. "That's buried. Nothing to gain from digging it up," he said firmly, his voice dry and heavy like an axe hitting a knot in the wood. Marcus didn't press him. He stood silently for a long moment before pulling a photo from his pocket, captured from a station surveillance camera. Derek handcuffing Jade in the hallway. He's the police chief. And they're burying it, just like what you saw. Thomas raised his eyes, truly looking at Marcus for the first time. Something shifted behind the crow's feet and thick brows of a man who had lived with silence for too long. "You think if I speak, anything changes?" Marcus answered immediately, without sugarcoating. "No, it won't fix the past. But if you stay quiet again, Derek will do worse to people than you. And by then, no one will believe you ever tried to do the right thing." The air went still as wind swept through dry leaves outside the porch. Thomas put down the axe and walked into the house without another word. Marcus was about to leave when the door opened again. Thomas returned, holding a sealed folder yellowed by time. He didn't look at Marcus, just placed it on the hood of the car and walked back inside as if the encounter had never occurred. Marcus opened the folder on the spot. Inside was a full copy of the original internal report, complete with signatures and investigative notes. The reason for dismissal: personal conflict, unverifiable basis. But what caught Marcus's eye wasn't the conclusion. It was the name listed at the end of Thomas's remarks. Indirect source of pressure obstructing action. Senator William Grant. The line sat modestly in the notes, but it sparked like flame hitting dry wire. In the investigation, Marcus folded the file carefully, down to its edges. He left the town as the sun began to cast shadows on the hills. Behind him stood the quiet house where a man once hid the truth and had just begun to reopen an old door. In Marcus's hands was a name long thought invisible, yet it was the first link between political power and shielded violence, and it would not be the last. The hotel room where Marcus was staying sat on the 3rd floor, overlooking an empty parking lot and a diner that had just closed. After the long drive, he didn't go straight to the shower. Instead, he sat at the desk, reopened the file from Thomas, and began examining it under the soft yellow light. The writing in the old report appeared sharper than he expected. It showed a 10-year-old connection between Derek Collins and Senator William Grant, back when both were listed as coordinators in a local police support program, a name that sounded procedural but was riddled with gaps. Marcus flipped to the last page, where a budget distribution map for special units was tucked away. One line stood out: selection of exceptional officers without full background checks. It was signed by a now-defunct federal annex. In the list of recipients, Derek's name was the only one marked exempted, no full personal file. Letter of endorsement from Grant's office. Marcus slammed the table. For the first time since this began, he felt like more than an investigator. He had been pulled into something deeper, darker, and far more dangerous. He scanned the entire file, encrypted it, and sent it to the Federal Investigative Center. In the attached email, Marcus requested an urgent trace on the funding sources of the support program, a list of politically approved personnel, and all communications between Grant's office and state-level law enforcement. Then he called Jade, voice calm but heavy with warning. "I found a connection. Derek isn't acting alone. Maybe he never was." Jade paused briefly, then replied, "Send everything you have. We need to move before they erase the evidence." Less than an hour later, Ethan Chen reported from the tech unit that the precinct's temporary archive system was showing signs of unauthorized access. A background command was automatically deleting metadata linked to documents containing the keywords grant and support program. Ethan traced the IP and found it originated from an internal device using a deactivated account from the previous month, proving someone inside was manipulating the system. Marcus called Ethan immediately, ordering isolation of the backup server and full data replication. "Someone knows we've touched something we weren't supposed to," he said, eyes fixed on the blinking monitor. The unease he felt wasn't just professional instinct anymore. It was the intuition formed from years of handling cases where the culprits didn't lurk in alleys, but sat inside government offices. Jade listened to the entire update by phone. She stood by the window of her office, the last light of day glinting off shelves of sealed case files. She understood that once the name Grant appeared and began vanishing from the system, this was no longer about investigating one violent officer. It was now a direct confrontation with a web of power where truth isn't dismissed with logic, but erased with silence under protection. Marcus didn't return to the city right away. He drove back to the small town where Thomas lived and stopped in front of the familiar wooden house. He didn't go in. He stayed inside the car, watching through the windshield. Someone was pruning branches in the yard, a slow but steady figure. Marcus picked up his phone and drafted a message. "I don't need another statement. I'm here to make sure you don't disappear." He didn't send it. Instead, he folded the phone closed and quietly started the car. The name Senator William Grant, once just a buried line in an old file, had stepped into the light, not as speculation but as the first exposed thread in a chain of corruption so entrenched its protectors would destroy entire systems to keep it hidden, and Marcus knew that from now on, no piece of evidence would be safe unless made public. Internal log data never lies. Ethan Chen understood that better than anyone in the precinct. When the code stream reached the encrypted note segment, he paused, tapping his fingers on the keyboard. It was a modification from 5 years ago, during a sensitive period when Derek Collins was abruptly promoted and a slew of recruitment files were wiped from the central system. The access had been made using a now deactivated user account, but the device ID was still traceable. Ethan froze as he decoded the final layer. The access belonged to someone with high-level clearance from the administrative division. He forwarded the log to Marcus Morgan's system with a short message. Found an old fingerprint. Marcus opened the file, his eyes locking on a name in the system access column, Cecilia Monroe. He frowned and pulled up the historical personnel chart. Cecilia had once been an internal secretary, overseeing personnel records, financial documents, and provisional investigation files. More critically, she had been responsible for approving expedited recruitment processes during a period of federal program funding when Derek Collins had been admitted without undergoing full background checks. It didn't take Marcus long to connect the dots. The year Cecilia resigned was the same year Jade Thompson was appointed chief of police. What had looked like a smooth transition on paper now appeared like a dust layering a cracked foundation. He picked up the phone and called Jade. Jade remained silent for a long time after hearing the news. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed completely, as if drained of all color. "Can you say that name again?" Marcus repeated it, more slowly this time. Jade nodded, though no one could see her. She stood and walked to the window of her office, looking out at the city dimming into twilight. The name, Cecilia Monroe, needed no title, no tenure. It was clear enough. She was Jade's aunt, her mother's sister, the one who took Jade in when she first joined the force, who helped her draft her first academy essay. Whenever Jade struggled with entrance exams or departmental reviews, it was Cecilia who quietly intervened to keep her from being pushed out. In Jade's memory, her aunt never raised her voice or argued in public. She was always the quiet guide behind the scenes, steady and persuasive. And now, that very name was the first to appear in a trail of data manipulation aimed at shielding Derek. "We need her statement," Marcus said. "I'll file for a soft subpoena." Jade cut in with calm certainty. "Let me go." Marcus hesitated, then realized he had no good reason to refuse. Blood ties, even when part of an investigation file, were a private terrain no outsider could fully grasp. It was near dusk when Jade stopped in front of the old brick house tucked in a quiet western suburb. She had visited this home dozens of times during her training, shared weekend dinners here. The silver-painted iron fence still stood, the little maple tree at the corner of the yard still neatly trimmed. Nothing had changed, except for the weight in her chest. Jade didn't enter right away. She stood at the wooden gate, hand resting on the latch, eyes peering through the drawn curtain. The lights inside were on. Somewhere in the kitchen, the faint clink of a spoon hitting porcelain echoed. It looked like a painting of domestic warmth, wholly alien to the data system she had just emerged from. She closed her eyes for a moment, not to calm herself, but to hold back the sound of collapse ringing in her mind. When she opened them again, her expression was still like the surface of water after a surge. She clenched her hand and released it, casting one last look at the door. No longer the entrance to a relative's home, but the threshold of a truth no one wanted to confront. In that moment, Jade was no longer the niece Cecilia had once nurtured, nor was she the police chief. She was the sole figure standing between two worlds, one of justice and one of blood. The door opened quietly, as if the person inside had been standing there all along. Cecilia Monroe looked at Jade without avoidance or surprise. She wore a pale gray sweater, a dish towel still in her hand. The house was just as Jade remembered it from her early days, neat, warm, calm, and scented faintly of mint tea. Everything was as before, except for the space now dividing them. Jade said nothing for the first few minutes. She walked in, stepping over the worn rug under the sofa, scanning the room as if trying to verify whether it was truly the same refuge she once knew. Cecilia placed the towel on the table and sat down. "I knew this day would come," she said, her voice disturbingly calm. Jade sat across from her, elbows on knees, eyes sharpened. "You authorized the modification to Derek's recruitment file in 2014. You removed Thomas's name from the system. The words cut through the familiar air like a blade. Cecilia neither denied nor flinched. She slowly nodded and looked down at her hands clasped on her lap. I did it because I thought I could control him, she said, because I believed helping him would protect your position. Jade didn't interrupt. Her face remained still, but her breathing had deepened. Cecilia explained that at the time, Senator Grant had approached her through a community funding channel, suggesting that if she made a few technical adjustments, they could ensure Jade's career faced no obstruction. They said you had real potential, she went on, and if certain files stayed quiet, they'd put you exactly where you belong. At first, Cecilia didn't think anything serious would result. A personnel entry altered, a report skipped, hidden within administrative formalities. But Derek grew bolder, began suppressing misconduct, sabotaging colleagues, and building an inner circle of protection. Cecilia had considered stepping back, yet every time she hesitated, Jade's name resurfaced as the unspoken bargaining chip. I was afraid to fix it. Afraid it would bring you down with it, afraid everything would fall on the only niece I ever treated like a daughter, she said, her voice breaking. So I protected you by doing nothing. Jade stayed quiet. Her eyes no longer held rage or grief. They were like a still lake at night, but the light within them had been extinguished. You think shielding a predator protects your niece? She asked, her voice steady. I never wanted this position badly enough to walk on someone else's blood. The words sank Cecilia back into her chair. Her gaze hollowed. After a long pause, she said, If you need a statement, I'll sign. But if you send anyone else, I'll stay silent to the grave. Jade stood up. She didn't plead, didn't scold, didn't console. She simply looked at her for a long time, an expression no longer of a niece, but of a commander straddling two moral lines. Then she turned and walked out. Marcus was already waiting in the car. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror, but said nothing. Jade opened the door, sat down silently, then handed him a folded sheet. Inside was a handwritten record of Cecilia's system logins, undeniable evidence, signed and sealed. Marcus tucked it into his coat. The car rolled away from the quiet street, leaving the old house behind. In the rearview mirror, the warm yellow glow from the living room still shone, casting the silhouette of a woman sitting motionless at a wooden table. Jade stared straight ahead, shoulders square, head held high, but inside her, something had just broken. Not blood, trust, and that was something no memo or apology could ever restore. Caleb stepped into the office holding a priority notice from federal headquarters. The ink still fresh on the page, the red seal sharply defined. He skimmed it once more before handing it to the agent beside him, his voice lowering. They've signed the order, both of them. Inside the modest office of the Special Investigative Task Force, the already tense atmosphere grew thick. The official summons for Derek Collins and Captain Richard Ross had just been approved, following the verification of unauthorized access logs provided by Thomas Grayson. Derek's inclusion came as no surprise, but the mention of Ross truly shifted the landscape. He held a higher rank in the chain of command and had never once been publicly questioned. When the information reached City Police headquarters, where Jade was still temporarily overseeing a fractured system, chaos spread immediately. Within 2 hours, internal factions divided into 3 clear camps. Some began packing up personal gear, removing internal branding, and wiping data from the network to avoid unexpected audits. Others buzzed about the real reason Ross was named. The rest stayed silent, watching, waiting to see what would happen next. In the tech coordination room, Derek Collins was called out of a short meeting. When he returned, he saw Jade standing at the center of the room, holding an envelope stamped with federal authority. In full view of the command staff, she read the suspension order line by line, her tone calm, as if she had anticipated this moment all along. Derek stood still for a few seconds, then sneered, "This is just political. You'll regret pulling the trigger too soon." He snatched the order from her hand, but no one responded to his threat. Every gaze followed him as he walked into the hallway, as though trying to see whether he would turn back or fall. In the command briefing room, Captain Richard Ross received his orders soon after. He offered no resistance, showed no surprise, only dipped his head slightly and read through the document in silence. But when his eyes reached the final line, his face tightened and his breathing shifted. A second later, he placed the document neatly on the table and looked toward the glass wall. The deputy from HR, who had followed him for 10 years, quietly stepped out. His personal assistant was no longer in the room. A former supporter who had backed him during the system reform 3 years earlier turned away, pretending to take a phone call. Isolation crept in quietly, but struck deeply. Downstairs, Maya Brooks received a message from Caleb. She turned to Danielle, who was reviewing internal case files, and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Your name is on the official witness list." Danielle dropped her pen, her eyes drifting into the invisible void between file drawers, memories stacked in her mind, as if every moment of silence from the past had returned all at once to demand reckoning. By the end of the day, Jade entered the Internal Affairs office. Danielle was still there, long after her shift had ended. Without lengthy words, Jade placed a copy of the summons on the desk. "This is your part. The rest is your choice." She paused, then spoke, not loudly but with certainty. This time, silence is not an option. Her hand rested briefly on Danielle's shoulder before she walked away, like wind brushing past. Outside headquarters, light rain began to fall. Derek was escorted through the main gate by 2 federal agents. Reporters were already in position, cameras aimed from all directions. Derek kept his head high, eyes sweeping across the crowd, as if trying to memorize every face. From inside, Jade watched without blinking. She knew what happened today was only the surface, but the moment Derek stepped into the vehicle, no longer in control, marked the first true crack. The system had been touched, and this time it wouldn't seal itself shut again. The tech surveillance room in the basement of Ridgepoint Station had been almost forgotten during the most turbulent days. While the entire department focused on the summons of Derek and Ross, Kevin remained hunched before 3 dim screens, eyes fixed on the code streams. Deleted files didn't vanish entirely, and he believed they could be restored, even if only as fragmented audio clips. The recovery process lasted nearly 12 hours. Kevin had to reconstruct the internal drive structure from an older system backup and reverse the overwritten compression format. Near dawn, a small speaker on his desk emitted the first sound. It was short, broken, but unmistakably Derek's voice. Loud, clear, and oddly furious. "You think I'm stupid? I followed orders from the one who guaranteed this. He said if that bitch gets through, the system is no longer ours." Maya sat up the moment Kevin played the clip. Ethan, standing behind her, darkened with fury. They listened to the full 3 minutes of recovered dialogue, a heated exchange between Derek and another officer, where Derek repeatedly mentioned being forced to protect the old structure, and that Jade needed to be dealt with before everything went off track. The ending made Ethan slam the table hard, sending a glass of water tipping over. He knew who she was, knew everything, and still did it, without hesitation. Kevin extracted the audio to an external drive, applied level 3 encryption, and forwarded it to Caleb's office. The file came with a unique code and a note, partial recovery, but confirmed internal source. Maya attached a full report detailing the recovery process step by step, ensuring its traceable authenticity. In the corner of the office, Danielle sat at her desk, yellow light casting shadows across a thick notebook. She had stayed up all night, writing down every memory, from the moment she saw the first redacted report to the breathless realization that no one trusted real documentation anymore. She wasn't writing as an internal affairs officer, but as someone who had once stood in darkness. On the final page, she struck one short line: "I no longer choose to stand in the middle." That morning, Danielle declined the department's legal counsel and opted for a neutral attorney recommended by Caleb's office. The FBI confirmed Kevin would be placed under temporary witness protection. Ethan was also summoned as a direct technical witness for the upcoming hearing. Before the shift ended, Jade called an emergency meeting. No documents, no slides. She stood at the center of the room and said calmly, "Anyone who aids or covers up from this point forward will face the same consequences as those who manipulated the data. I don't need neutral people. I need people who still know right from wrong." As the meeting ended, Caleb received the recovered recording via a secure network. The system verified the file was unaltered, sourced precisely to the necessary timestamp. That same night, a copy was sent to the Department of Justice's Archive Division. One line appeared on the main screen: "File verified, admissible evidence." Jade remained alone in her office, staring at that line like it was a small candle in a long, dark corridor. Outside the window, rain fell. The first drops hit the metal roof of the tech room, echoing rhythmically. A system once believed to be airtight, untouchable, was now beginning to leak from the very place it considered invisible. Sound. That afternoon, an old community center on the edge of the administrative district unexpectedly became the media focus of the entire city. There were no flashy banners, no backdrops with police logos. The room was simply arranged with folding chairs, wooden tables, a projection screen, and a neat row of microphones. What made the atmosphere unusual was the presence of nearly 20 reporters, 3 local TV stations, and a representative from a national news outlet. Jade had chosen not to hold the announcement at police headquarters. She wanted to remove the truth from the place that once tried to bury it. Alongside Caleb and the coordinating attorney, she ran a final check on the audio and video systems. The recording had been verified for authenticity, presented in full, without edits. Caleb glanced at her moments before the start, his eyes asking a final, silent question. Jade nodded. Everything was ready. "Thank you for being here," Jade began, without notes and without introduction. "We'll let the audio speak for itself." The screen lit up, displaying a sound wave graph, timestamp, and access code from the monitoring device. Derek's voice echoed through the room, raspy, angry, and unmistakably hostile. "I know who she is, but letting her through that door is putting this whole system in the wrong hands." Silence instantly blanketed the room. No whispers, no scribbled notes. The audio lasted only a few minutes, but its impact hit like an explosion on already cracked concrete. When it ended, Jade spoke before anyone else could. She stepped up to the microphone, the glow of the waveform reflecting behind her on the gray wall. "I'm not the first to be silenced by invisible power," she said steadily, her voice calm and unshaken, "but I might be the last one who kept the proof." There was no need to add more. That sentence alone became the headline of hundreds of articles later that day. A local radio station replayed the recording in a special broadcast. 2 major newspapers published urgent op-eds on the culture of concealment within law enforcement and the price of silence. The hashtag #VoiceOverSilence quickly spread on social media, accompanied by an image of Jade standing before the waveform screen. Outside the police station, crowds gathered silently. They didn't chant, they simply held up cardboard signs reading, "We're watching," and "No one stands above dat." By nightfall, the city's central police headquarters was bathed in car lights and projection beams. As staff exited the building, they saw fresh graffiti in red paint across the main gate. "Truth is louder." A short sentence, but with a tone no power washer or internal report could erase. Jade returned to her office close to midnight. The reading lamp still burned beside her desk. A new email had arrived, from an anonymous address, containing only one line: "Stay alive by staying silent." She didn't hesitate, didn't forward it, didn't report it to IT. She printed it, trimmed the margins, and pinned it directly to the bulletin board outside her office door. By morning, everyone walking by saw it. A warning that needed no decryption, a response that required no words. No one dared take it down. From that moment on, the entire situation shifted into something else. No longer an internal investigation, but a tug-of-war between an individual bearing evidence and a system fracturing from within. The truth had broken into the light, and it no longer needed permission to exist. Less than a day after the recording was made public, the undercurrents inside the police department turned into open ruptures. A group of younger officers, most of whom had previously remained silent over minor misconduct, jointly signed a petition demanding a full audit of complaint handling records from the past 10 years. The petition was quickly submitted to Internal Affairs and appeared on an open forum for department staff. An emergency meeting was immediately convened. The atmosphere in the closed conference room was thick with resentment. A middle-aged officer slammed a newspaper with Jade's photo onto the table, growling, "We've become a national joke." Another officer shoved back his chair and stormed out mid-meeting. Sarcastic remarks like, "She's a great actress," started to circulate more frequently, accompanied by wary glances toward anyone who showed open support. Beyond indirect attacks, personal retaliation against Jade began to escalate. Her personal accounts were hacked, and private photos from a family trip 3 years prior were suddenly posted on an anonymous forum, accompanied by distorted captions. The office phone rang throughout the night with repeated profane threats. One morning, as she approached her car, Jade discovered a GPS tracking device attached beneath it, accurate down to each turn. Caleb called for a protective detail and suggested moving her to a controlled, temporary residence. But Jade refused. "If I leave, who will still dare to stay?" That single line left the entire investigative team in silence. Amid a trust structure stretched to its limits, Jade's refusal to retreat became the final anchor holding the entire effort together. Maya and Kevin weren't spared either. Maya was suspended for violating media communication policies, despite having made no public statement. Kevin was ordered to surrender all data recovery equipment and access credentials. Both were placed under internal monitoring, not through official cameras, but through quiet stares, random questions about who they met, what they said, and what they sent. Even under increasing pressure, they didn't retract their statements. Maya texted Danielle a single line, "Don't change a single period." Kevin continued arriving at the monitoring room on time, sitting in his usual chair, checking system logs as always. Amid a crumbling structure, they chose to stay exactly where they were. From outside, political pressure began to intervene directly. Senator Grant's office sent a confidential notice to Caleb, suggesting the investigation be temporarily suspended to prevent social unrest. A new internal committee was formed, proposing a closed hearing, without media, without cameras, under the premise of witness protection. Jade declined. She handwrote a short message to the entire coordination system. All hearing proceedings must be public, independently recorded and audited by a third party. If denied, I will forward the entire case file to the Federal Press Association. No one replied immediately, but many understood that the statement had drawn a line that could not be walked back. A front-page editorial appeared the next morning in the Wilford Daily with a bold headline, "She refused to stay silent. What about us?" The article quoted no sources, simply describing how one woman had forced an entire system to stumble mid-stride. That evening, Caleb received a tip that a small camera had been discovered outside Jade's house, hidden in the garden lights. It was unclear how long it had been active, but the battery was still full. When Caleb sent her the photo, Jade showed no surprise. She printed a city map and marked all the locations where threats had occurred with red circles. Each mark represented another attempt by the system to silence her through technology, intimidation, or bureaucratic pressure. She stood alone in her office, the desk lamp casting a long shadow on the wall. Looking at the map, she spoke quietly, to no one in particular. "The lights are on. Let's see if they dare come out." The city felt cloaked in a heavy, suffocating blanket. On the third floor of headquarters, the light in Jade's office remained on. She sat across from Caleb Morgan, flipping through documents marked with red tags. They didn't speak much. Both understood tonight was the final line before everything came to light. Outside, distant sirens echoed, mingling with cold drafts slipping through the worn window frame. Caleb put down his pen and leaned over the latest version of Maya's testimony, while Jade gently gripped the strap of her bag, her gaze fixed on the darkened window pane. At that same moment, on the city's east side, Danielle left the judicial building, her steps weary. Sparse streetlights cast long shadows across the rain-spotted pavement. As she rounded a corner, something felt off. The sensation of being watched wasn't triggered by sound or sight, but a raw instinct, like needles tracing her spine. She stopped near the parking lot, quickly scanning the area, but saw no one. A gust of wind flipped her coat hem, making her shiver, though the air wasn't cold. When she arrived home, she fumbled for her keys, still glancing back now and then. As she stepped inside, Danielle froze. The mailbox was ajar. A folded piece of paper, unsigned, fell at her feet. She bent to pick it up with 2 fingers, as if afraid of touching something toxic. On the crumpled paper was a scrawled line in black ink. One false statement could cost a life. Her heart jolted. She stood motionless, her back pressed to the door. In those moments, she thought of Caleb, of Maya, and most of all, of Jade. She photographed the note, then slid it back into the envelope and carefully placed it in the drawer near the entrance. Her hand trembled as she unlocked her phone and hovered over Caleb's number. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to report it immediately, but another part knew that once the information spread, things could spiral beyond control. Memories resurfaced from her early days in the force, when Derek had guided her through difficult cases. The silent nods of trust, the unspoken understanding during tense operations. But the truth had fractured everything. Danielle chose silence, not out of ignorance but fear. Now, every step she took felt like crossing a thin sheet of ice. The image of Jade handcuffed in the precinct came sharply to mind, her face calm even while being publicly humiliated. She wasn't just a woman being insulted. She was a symbol pushed into the mud to see if she could rise again. Danielle tightened her grip on her phone, snapped photos of the envelope, the mailbox, and the faint shoe print on her tile floor. She sent them to Caleb with a short message: "Keep these safe." She didn't call emergency services, didn't file a report. Tonight, silence held more value than noise. She knew that any move might prompt those behind the note to escalate from threats to action. Opening the balcony door, Danielle looked up at the black sky. A breeze swept her loose hair over her shoulders. Across the street, a dark-colored car sat parked. Its door opened, the engine started quietly, and the vehicle pulled away without headlights. In that fleeting second, the streetlight reflected off the rear window, revealing a man in the passenger seat holding a clearly labeled folder. Brooks, witness report. Danielle stepped back inside and locked the door with both bolts. Her hands no longer trembled, but they were ice cold. Outside, the darkness had learned the name of tomorrow's witness, and tonight it would not rest. The computer screen blinked off just as the internal phone rang twice. Ethan Chen answered, and a flat voice from system security announced, "All workstations related to the internal investigation will be temporarily locked for security review. Your personal devices have also been flagged for impound by upper-level order." Ethan paused, his fingers curling slightly around the desk's edge. He knew this wasn't standard protocol. An unreleased video, the original clip of Derek attacking Jade, still sat in an auxiliary drive he hadn't yet encrypted. Now it might be in someone else's hands, jeopardizing the evidence and putting him directly in harm's way. He called Jade. It rang 3 times before she picked up. He didn't waste words. "They just took all my equipment, including the original drive." There was no immediate response. A thick silence stretched across the line. When Jade finally spoke, her voice was softer than usual, as if echoing from a soundless room. "Understood." The call ended without another word. In her third-floor office, Jade sat alone beneath the desk lamp. Her hand rested on a stack of files, shoulders slightly hunched, as if bearing a weight no one could see. What had slipped away did so without noise. Her subordinate's trust, crucial evidence, a teammate's safety, and the illusion that the system she once believed in would protect her. For the first time since Derek had choked her inside the station, Jade felt unsteady on her feet. Her resilience hadn't vanished, but it had cracked, worn thin by the relentless losses. Outside, the night pressed in from all sides. In that moment, she let exhaustion seep through, allowed doubt to surface. She asked herself, was anyone truly listening? Then, from somewhere deeper than thought, A memory surfaced. Derek's grip, Maya's stare, Caleb's reason for taking the case, and more than that, the handwritten letters sent to the precinct that week, each one signed with thanks. Thank you for not staying silent. Jade stood, picked up her badge, and adjusted it over her chest. The desk light caught its surface, reflecting a face too familiar with endurance. As she stepped into the hallway, she saw Kevin being escorted by 2 internal affairs officers. He turned slightly at her gaze, but said nothing. Those nearby avoided looking at her, eyes glued to files or feigning urgency. That silence wasn't fear alone. It was a form of ethical paralysis, and Jade knew that when good people stayed quiet, evil needed no permission to persist. She returned to her office and walked straight to the wall cabinet. Opening the bottom drawer, she retrieved a slim envelope, its edges slightly worn. The handwriting on the front tilted slightly to "The Next Chief." She had written it on her first day in command, a reminder to herself of endurance and inherited responsibility. Sitting down, she flipped the envelope and added one final line to the letter inside. "If I fail, don't let this silence last another day." She placed the letter back, locked the drawer, and stood. Outside, wind whistled through the hallway, as if twisting through the void in this broken system. Her office door closed behind her, but the hallway lights remained on. Somewhere in the dark, a quiet flame was still being kept alive. The courtroom was filled with the hum of the air conditioner and the dry sound of paper being turned. Derek's defense attorney paused midway through his rebuttal, eyes fixed on the screen displaying data from Maya and Caleb, where retrieval logs had been trimmed and access timestamps blurred. "Without a third-party verification, this entire chain remains a one-sided construction," he said, his tone calm but his legal implication sharp. A few members of the jury exchanged glances. The slight nods were no surprise. Jade understood what was happening. What they had, no matter how valid, was still missing a crucial link. The rear door of the courtroom swung open without warning. A man stepped in, tall and lean, carrying a canvas folder. His face was drawn, his nose defined by fatigue. No one recognized him at first until Caleb tilted his head, eyebrows slightly furrowed. Jade turned to look, then froze. The man was Thomas Grayson, the former head technician of the Internal Data Department, who had run the city's surveillance system for 7 years before suddenly resigning. Thomas didn't speak. He gave a brief nod to the court clerk, then walked directly to the witness bench. His old suit fit snugly over a slightly hunched back, but each step was steady, as if he had thought through this moment for a very long time. In his hands was a sealed folder. The courtroom held its breath. Jade's team looked at him with cautious hope. Derek's side reacted more strongly, especially Victor Boone, who had replaced Thomas. His expression tightened, hand involuntarily gripping his chin, as if bracing for a reflexive blow. Thomas, however, didn't look at anyone. He placed the folder on the table before the witness stand and looked straight at the panel of judges. "My name is Thomas Grayson. I worked in the Internal Data Administration Department from 2012 to 2019. During that time, I was asked 3 times to delete data related to wrongful arrests. Each time it was justified internally. Each time it was explained away as a matter of security or to avoid damaging the department's reputation." His voice was hoarse, but each word was sharp and deliberate, echoing through the quiet room. No one interrupted. He continued, resting his hand lightly on the folder. "I resigned after my wife, who worked in the city's civil division, was abruptly fired with no explanation. 2 days earlier, I had refused to delete a video related to the use of excessive force at a holding facility. I didn't say anything then. I didn't have the strength to fight back, but I kept a copy of the data, and today I'm bringing it here." Derek's lawyer immediately stood up, requesting the court halt proceedings to verify the witness's identity and reliability. The judge raised a hand for order, then turned to Thomas. "Are you willing to submit that folder for the counsel's review?" Thomas looked at him directly. His gaze was calm and steady. "I will, if I'm guaranteed federal witness protection. I'm not going through this again." Maya lowered her head slightly. Caleb gave a small nod. understanding what this testimony cost him. Ethan, seated at the end of the row, slowly released his hands from the table, exhaling as if a long-held breath had finally been freed. Jade never took her eyes off the man before her. In that brief moment, they looked at each other. No words, no expression, just a quiet recognition between two people who had once stood close to the system's center, watched it operate, been cast aside by it, and now, in their own ways, were finding their way back. Thomas sat as invited. The sealed folder lay on the table like a disarmed bomb, waiting for the moment to explode. No one spoke. No one moved. And in that room, usually ruled by logic and procedure, someone had entered from the back door, carrying something that could change everything. Caleb stood as soon as Thomas made his request. He consulted briefly with Jade's attorney, then addressed the judge, asking to pause proceedings to protect the witness. "Mr. Grayson holds data that could impact multiple cases. We request he be moved to a private room under federal supervision before his next testimony is presented." The judge paused, then lightly tapped the gavel. "Approved. However, while we await formal procedures, the witness may deliver a preliminary statement under my direct supervision." Thomas was asked to return to the stand. He placed both hands on his knees, lowered his head slightly, then looked up, voice no longer shaking, each word clear as though he had recited them 100 times in his mind. "I reviewed the complete system access logs from 2012 through 2019, the time I left. At least 12 incidents had post-ement data manipulation, showing signs of overwriting or deletion. All 12 were connected to the second-tier patrol unit, where Officer Derek Collins once served." He paused briefly, then continued. "Each access was made with high-level administrative privileges. The user list includes 2 system managers, 1 lead technician seated front right, and a deputy from the investigation department still in office. I also found illegal access to the arrest file related to Chief Jade Thompson. That data was opened the night of the incident and overwritten within 3 minutes. The operator used credentials tied to the department's internal legal division." The air felt sucked from the room. Senator Grant pulled out his phone, whispered to an aide, then silently exited without a backward glance. Behind the rows, 2 young officers who had once sat beside Derek now bowed their heads, hands clasped tight. One of them quietly removed his badge and placed it on the table before slumping forward. Ethan Chen leaned back in his seat, as if the weight on his chest had finally lifted. His eyes met Caleb's, then moved to Jade. Nothing needed to be said. Everything was already understood. Thomas pulled out another document, his voice steady. "I was once offered money to forget about a video that showed Chief Thompson refusing a coerced settlement during a 2016 detention case. After I declined, my wife's contract was terminated within 10 days. That video, like others, vanished from the system soon after, but I backed it up." Caleb tightened the strap on his bag and gave a firm nod. For the first time during the entire trial, Jade's side felt that what they had built through quiet persistence was finally beginning to hit the system's core. Thomas's testimony lasted 12 minutes, enough to shift the entire course of the trial. The judicial panel convened briefly, then announced the formation of a federal independent review team to audit the city's entire law enforcement data system. 6 previously suspended cases would be reopened. Derek Collins' file would now face expanded investigation for systematic evidence tampering. As the session paused to protect the witness, Thomas was escorted out through a side door. Before leaving, he turned around. Jade remained seated in the front row, eyes locked on him. They didn't nod or exchange expressions, but in that instant was a silent recognition between survivors, those who had stayed quiet too long, now returning, step by step, word by word, to unlock a door others had tried to keep shut forever. The door closed behind him, but the reverberations from his testimony crept into every crack, and once again, it was the man who came in through the back door who forced the system to reckon with itself. The courtroom was packed to suffocation that morning. Reporters jostled for space along the hallway. Civil rights representatives held small placards that read, "No one is above the law," and at the front rows sat federal observers, stoic, tight-lipped, and razor-sharp in their gaze. Every step echoed against the polished tile floor, slicing through the silence before the judge entered. This was the day Derek Collins would finally face his position as a defendant, stripped of the protective fence he once stood behind with impunity. Derek sat at the defendant's table, arms crossed, his shirt ironed to perfection without a single crease. His eyes swept the benches but lingered on no one. Beside him, his private attorney clutched a thick folder, preparing for a battle they still hoped could be prolonged. The federal prosecutor rose and spoke with a firm, unwavering tone. 4 charges were read aloud, one by one: abuse of authority, assault during official duty, unauthorized interference with administrative data, and deliberate concealment of critical evidence. Each charge was accompanied by concrete evidence, citing statements from Thomas Grayson, Maya Brooks, and federal investigator Caleb Morgan. The video Ethan Chen had recovered from the secondary storage device played on the large screen, silencing the entire room as if someone had strangled the very air. Derek remained composed until the 3rd segment, when a close-up appeared of his hands tightening around Jade's neck, so clear that the metallic clink of handcuffs hitting the wall could be heard. His lips pressed tightly, his eyes blinked rapidly. As the prosecution moved into cross-examination, Derek invoked his right to remain silent, refusing to answer any questions. The final mask cracked. He was no longer the man in control, but the one being exposed. The next name mentioned wasn't physically present, but sent shockwaves through the room: Captain Richard Ross. 3 email excerpts were projected, showing Ross instructing internal probes to be delayed and advising not to escalate matters during politically sensitive times. These messages struck at the core of the system, a silent form of protection, powerful enough to obscure brutality. The prosecutor concluded that Ross was under federal investigation as a potential accomplice. The statement hit like a hammer blow against a structure once thought untouchable. Shortly after the hearing, several mid-level officers resigned, citing health reasons or personal matters. The Internal Affairs Division received an urgent request from the Judicial Council to compile a list of everyone who had accessed the administrative system in the past 5 years. The atmosphere across the entire enforcement apparatus shifted from passive tension to a whirlwind emerging from the very center of the system, once deemed untouchable. As the proceedings concluded, the judge turned to the plaintiff and asked whether she wished to make a final statement. All eyes shifted to the head of the table, where Jade Thompson sat in silence with a folder before her. A few camera lights redirected their focus, anticipating a response, but she did not rise, did not speak. She simply recapped her pen, stacked her papers neatly, and slowly left her seat. The sound of her shoes echoed gently on the tiled floor, but struck others' ears like a gavel sealing judgment. She passed the front row without a glance back. The door opened, then closed behind her. Inside, people continued to report, discuss, and take notes. But that refusal to speak, the silence of the woman once arrested inside the very institution she led, carried more weight than any formal accusation. That day, Derek Collins was officially indicted before the law. And Jade, though she said nothing, left behind a cold, unwavering punctuation mark amid the quake of a collapsing system. The media crowded both sides of the hallway, lenses pointed squarely at the courtroom door as Jade emerged. Flashlights flickered non-stop, voices called her name alongside frantic questions. She gave no reply, didn't pause. Her gaze stayed fixed on the far end of the hallway, the quieter place few noticed. Maya caught up quickly, her footsteps landing beside Jade's. "Jade, if you want to speak to the press, I can help coordinate." The sentence barely finished when Jade slightly turned her head and gave a faint shake. It wasn't rejection or denial, but a quiet period to a noise she no longer wished to fuel. When the office door on the third floor opened, the scent of aged wood and old paper immediately filled the air. The room remained untouched since her last visit. The swivel chair tilted slightly left, a pencil slanted in a small glass, and an unsigned file left open to its final page. No one had cleaned, no one had moved anything. It was as if time had frozen with her. From the morning Derek handcuffed her in her own station, Jade placed the folder on the desk, sat down and leaned against the smooth, cold wood. Her hand gripped the badge on her chest, a reflexive act of someone still clinging to something unnamed. Outside the window, the wind swept the stone corridor, whispering faintly. Memories returned. Her first day in office, greeted by stiff handshakes and half smiles. The days that followed, surviving skeptical stares and hollow promises. To keep her seat, she had sometimes accepted altered memos and heeded advice to stay quiet for peace. All of it, however well-meant, now struck like salt on an open wound. 3 soft knocks tapped on the door. Ethan entered first, followed by Maya and Caleb. No one spoke immediately. They looked at her as Ethan placed a newspaper on the table. The headline ran boldly, "Derek Collins officially charged to Police Chief Jade Thompson declines to comment." Maya gave a faint, uneasy smile and said, "You know, people are starting to call you the one who opened the first door." Jade didn't smile. She nodded, her eyes fixed on the badge in her hand. A moment later, she looked up. Her voice wasn't loud, but rang clear. "Don't let it happen again." All 3 fell silent. No one asked her to explain. Caleb placed a hand on Jade's shoulder, a gesture of understanding among those who knew that victory did not mean finality. They left, one by one, leaving her with the soft amber light of the afternoon and the fading sound of footsteps down the corridor. On the desk, beside the pencil holder, was a small envelope with no name. The paper was old, its fold lines slightly crumpled. She opened it and read the handwritten note in neat, rounded letters. "I was once a trainee at the station. I saw you stand up for a homeless man being humiliated while everyone else turned away. I was young, but I understood. Some people don't have to shout to make the whole system listen." Jade returned the letter to its envelope and folded it carefully. She stood, turned, locked the office door, drew the curtain, and returned to her desk. Outside, public discourse raged like oil to fire, with every story and image spreading across social media and primetime news. But inside, the woman once seen as the weakest in the precinct was making a choice to continue not through speeches or grand victories, but through something else. Quiet, steady persistence, day after day, in the very room where others. City Hall was packed that morning. A large banner stretched across the stage, honoring those who broke the silence. In the center of the front row sat a nameplate that read, "Police Chief Jade Thompson," placed beside a silver-plated badge. But the seat remained empty. Cameras zoomed in. The host hesitated briefly, then continued the speech. No one came forward to accept the honor, and no explanation was given. Danielle sat quietly next to that empty chair. She didn't speak, didn't shed tears. Her silence wasn't due to a lack of words. It was her way of admitting what she had once failed to do. She remembered Jade's eyes on the day of the arrest, neither angry nor resentful, but piercing through every bystander who had chosen to look away, including herself. The ceremony ended in uneven applause. Some camera lenses remained fixed on the unoccupied seat. News headlines followed quickly. The hero who didn't show, the final silence of the one who broke it. A city spokesperson issued a brief statement. Jade was invited, but did not confirm attendance. Maya, Ethan, and Caleb watched the ceremony on screen. Maya wasn't surprised. Ethan murmured, maybe she never needed applause. Caleb nodded, gaze distant. She always knew when to step in and when to step back. That afternoon, Danielle returned to Jade's office. Everything was in place, the pen aligned, a file left open. On the desk was a single handwritten note. Some things don't need applause to be right. Danielle sat in the chair across from Jade's, resting her hand on the desk's smooth surface. She didn't expect Jade to return, but now understood. Some people don't need to be present to make an entire system reflect. By the next morning, comments flooded the news outlets. Some criticized Jade for being prideful, but many defended her absence, calling it a louder statement than any speech. It wasn't a retreat. It was a reminder that justice doesn't live on stage, but in quiet acts of conviction. One day later, a former officer who had once opposed Jade sent an apology. Attached was a letter signed by 5 others, including one who had publicly supported Derek. W. Taylor Law School announced Jade's case would be included in a mandatory curriculum on ethics and power. Without taking the podium, Jade was already reshaping how silence is understood. Danielle stepped out of the office and locked the door. A young officer asked, "Do you think she'll come back?" Danielle glanced down the quiet hallway, where light spilled into still air, and said, "She never really left." That morning, the federal inspector's headquarters was nearly full. Marcus Reed stepped onto the platform, carrying a report of over 300 pages, marking the conclusion of a 5-month investigation. Behind him, charts displayed a series of 27 unauthorized system interventions. Among them were 9 cases of administrative abuse, 3 involving pressure to alter witness statements, and 1 showing media coordination through undisclosed funding. Each case was presented without dramatization. The data spoke for itself. Names once considered untouchable appeared clearly. High-ranking officers, system technicians, even a former candidate for commissioner. No one interrupted. A few glances shifted to the rear seats, where Jade Thompson had once sat. Her name appeared in the section titled Trigger Factors for System-Wide Investigation, with no embellishment, just one sentence. An individual case of resistance that forced administrative self-assessment. A cold line, but heavy in weight. After the presentation, several precincts voluntarily submitted internal audit proposals. A group of young officers in North Point proposed creating independent ethics units, reporting outside of local command, a suggestion quickly acknowledged by civil organizations. Marcus signed the last page, adding a handwritten note. Phase 1 complete. His expression was not of satisfaction, but readiness. Less than an hour later, the Department of Justice released an official announcement forming a special investigative task force called Torchlight, including federal inspectors, civil representatives, and experts who had left the system in protest. Phase 2 would focus on precincts showing signs similar to those in Jade's case, particularly those with off-hour data access, missing audit trails, or unresolved internal complaints. 4 precincts were marked in red, indicating urgent oversight. That same afternoon, several district-level officials submitted early retirement letters. No formal charges were filed, but the inspection group's warning made it clear the era of voluntary silence had ended. Their successors were instructed to release all internal disciplinary records within 30 days, an unprecedented demand. On the 6th floor, Marcus made a quiet phone call. "You should know," he said, "they won't stop. Because of you, they can't pretend not to see anymore." On the other end, a calm voice replied, "I know, and I'll be watching." The call ended, but the story continued. The impact of the report and Torchlight spread quickly. Several media outlets launched forums, inviting the public to share stories of being dismissed or ignored by local precincts. Hundreds of responses appeared overnight, alongside a petition with thousands of signatures demanding a direct reporting channel to the Department of Justice. At the State Police Academy, an emergency seminar was held on ethical responsibility in data handling and the right to remain silent against injustice. Jade's case was made a required study for first-year cadets. W. Taylor Law School included the full case file in a course titled Law and Power in Institutional Systems. At Torchlight's headquarters, Marcus stood before a board showing 4 red-flagged precincts. Below were task assignments, responsibility charts, and a review timeline. But the most striking detail was a photo from the prior award ceremony. The empty chair still at the center of the front row. Beneath it, a handwritten note in bold red read, "We began with 1. Now, no one gets left behind." The story ends here, but the questions it raises remain. Have you ever been misunderstood, judged unfairly just because someone didn't truly see you? Have you ever been underestimated, pushed aside, yet quietly proved that you were stronger, smarter, and more resilient than they imagined. You don't have to be an officer, an investigator, or a whistleblower to know the silence that surrounds injustice. Sometimes, the system chooses to look away, but what matters is that someone still speaks up, and someone still listens. If this story made you think, please share it so others can reflect too. Turn your feelings into action by paying attention, by asking questions, and most importantly, by refusing to stay silent when something is wrong. And if you believe in the power of truth, of courage, and of change, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories that inspire. Stories about people who dared to step outside the lines and shake the walls of systems that thought they could never be moved. Because sometimes, all it takes is one voice, and the whole system has to start listening again.